We put on these webinars. We try monthly, but we're typically every other month. And we're getting there, and we are in collaboration with the California Department of Social Services, and we are so happy and honored to be able to partner with them in the work that we do. Please take this opportunity to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your role, your county, or agency. And today's icebreaker is one word that describes how you like to build connection with families. One word that helps describe how you like to build connection with families. Humor is my go-to. I always like to make things light and fun, and I like to say 80% of the time I'm successful, and 90% of the time the family just does not appreciate it. So we got to put and refocus. But we're here. We do have quite a few registered for today's webinar. It is 101. We're going to give ourselves a few minutes to let everybody get on board, get on the platform, and make sure that your sound is working, your technology is working. We can see all of our faces. Again, my name is Donnie Lynch, and I'm so happy you're here. You will see my partner in crime, the incomparable James Williams. James, wave to the crowd. James is our extraordinaire behind the scenes. If you ever have any issues with technology, sound, please go ahead and side quest or private message James, and he will be happy to help you. Kayla says hi. I see Chris Petty in the audience today too. Chris, good to see you. Both two of our partners with the California Department of Social Services, the WIPS unit, the Wraparound Implementation Program.
Wraparound and integrated practices support
Integrated
unit.
practice. There, I'll get it. It just
It's okay.
changed, so you
It's
got to
okay.
give me a few, folks.
You're good.
Thanks, Kayla. And we're here this afternoon with Resistance to Resilience, Engaging Caregivers in Meaningful Ways. My name is Donnie Lynch, and I'd love to stop and take a moment. You did hear Kayla in the audience. Kayla, please come forward and introduce yourself. I would love for everybody to know my amazing partner at the California Department of Social Services. Kayla, come on in.
Hey, Donna. Thank you. My name is Kayla Granderson, and I am an analyst here at the California Department of Social Services. I get to work with Donna on all the peer things, and also I'm a wraparound consultant. And I do see some familiar faces in here, so I just wanted to say, hey, Ebony, hey, James. Good to see y'all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kayla. I'm so glad you're here. Kayla's doing big things over there. So anytime you can take time out of your day and join us, it is special. And I am so grateful for you and your partnership all of the time. All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome. Please take the time to introduce yourself in chat, name, role, county, agency. Today's icebreaker is one word that describes how you like to build connection with families. I see empathy. What else is in here? Listening. Yes. Respect. Love it. Respect. Listen. I have to work on my listening. That is one thing that you have to build that muscle. That's the muscle I have to build. All right, let's get busy. Again, my name is Donnie Lynch, and on behalf of the Resource Center for Family Focused Practice and at UC Davis, and in partnership with the wonderful California Department of Social Services, I want to thank you all for joining us on this Monday afternoon from 1 to 3. Ebony and I were just talking about how Monday can take a hard right turn out from underneath you. So to be able to continue to be here today, thank you so much for today's interactive session on engaging caregivers with empathy, turning resistance into partnership. Whether you're a frontline worker, family specialist, parent or youth partner, clinician, or part of a larger behavioral health and child welfare community, this session was designed with you in mind. So with that, I would love to do a little bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded, and a link will be shared with everybody who's been registered today. It will show up on our website along with all of the corresponding materials once it's ready. Also, if you need any technical support and just joining us, either myself or James will be able to help you with that. And also, please feel free to use either the chat box feature or raise your hand during Ebony's presentation. She is happy to take questions and considerations during her presentation, and I'll remind you throughout as well. Today's discussion does center on the core truth we seek across our work. Caregivers play an essential role in the success of interventions and lasting change. Yet, we also know that even the most well-intentioned caregivers sometimes struggle to apply strategies with consistency. Our goal is to equip you with concrete tools and language to turn moments of challenge into deeper opportunities for partnership and progress. I am honored to welcome Ebony Chambers McClinton as our presenter today. Ebony is a seasoned leader with more than 20 years of experience in social justice, child welfare, and mental health. She provides consultation and guidance in strategic change management and leadership development to support organizational growth and equity. Her expertise includes training nonprofits, consulting firms, and university-based centers, including work here with us at UC Davis Human Services, and culturally responsive, inclusive practices. Ebony also is a national advocate for equitable access to mental health care, serving on the Mental Health Services Act Steering Committee and as a board president of Black Women United. Her contributions have been recognized through numerous honors, including the 2023 Champions for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Award and the Sacramento Business Journal's 40 Under 40. We're truly grateful to have her with us today to share her insight, energy, and practical tools for caregiver engagement. And with that, please join me in welcoming Ebony Chambers McClinton. Ebony, thank you so much for being here. You have been my mentor and friend for years and years, and I'm so excited for you to be presenting today. And with that, Ebony, come on in.
Thank you, Donna. And I'm so excited to see some familiar names and faces today, and such an honor as always to work with Donna and Kayla and James in the work that they do and the transformational change they create in communities through that work. And all of us in this space, really, truly, on all of us in this space. So Donna share a lot of my professional accolades and appreciate that. Donna, I kind of chuckled to myself as she said 40 under 40. I'm like, oh, haven't been there in a few years. So that old award should probably no longer be highlighted because it gives a false expectation around how old I am. But I'll take it. I'm forever 21, but not just the clothing store, but the attitude, if you will. We are going to be talking about caregivers today, which I know is such a significant topic. I always, as a person with lived experience, and I don't even know if that was announced in the bio. I am a mom of four. I have 4 children. Hey, Ebony twin in the chat, Ebony Blake. I have 4 children. My youngest is 18. My oldest is 33, and I have 2 grandkids, 12 and 5. Can't believe that. My oldest child, we navigated the child welfare system, adoption system, behavioral health, and juvenile justice system. So I like to say we touched a little bit of everything and had challenges and worked through a lot in all of those areas. And it really taught me a few things, being a professional in our system of care, and then bringing my lived experience in, just how isolating that was, especially considering that I had a lot of the professional expertise. And then as I started navigating it in my own personal life, I realized just how many gaps there were in the system. And it made me even more acutely aware of how important and how much advocacy was needed in our systems of care on behalf of our caregivers and our family members. And so, if you've been in any trainings with me through UC Davis or in any other aspects of this work, you'll know I am a fierce advocate for those that are caring for our children, and that our children don't live in a vacuum. They don't live in isolation. So if we're working on supporting a young person, we can't do that without also making sure that we're doing a lot of good skills transfer to the caregivers and making sure they have just as much support as the young people. It is a whole family work, which is exciting as we continue to see our systems continue to be reformed and more well supported, that there's an emphasis in this work. So I'm going to share slides and talk about where we're going with our time today. But as Danae already shared, this time is yours. There's lots of things I can imagine you could be doing on a Monday afternoon. It is Monday. Have mercy. And so I appreciate that you're here spending 2 hours to have this conversation, which also means that you were hoping to walk away with something. Please don't hesitate as I'm talking to use the raise hand function. If you have a question, you're also welcome to put questions in the chat. I don't mind being interrupted. I think that this is a collaborative space where we all get to think and learn together. I may have some best practices I'll share, but you may have some as well. And that means that in this space, we all think, we all learn, we all grow together. So please share your insights as we move together with our time. I also want to know what you're hoping, if you have burning questions. When you started, you were like, oh, this is the challenge I'm experiencing, or this is the barrier that I've come across multiple times and I'm trying to figure out how to work it. Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat because we want to make sure that we answer your questions and you walk away with what you were hoping to learn from our time today. And then Danae said, I'm always happy to ask any questions on your behalf if technology is not allowing you to come off mute. Yes, so you can always, if you have an anonymous question, you can message Danae as well, and she'll make sure that it gets read out loud without identifying you. We want this to be a safe space for you to get your questions answered and feel comfortable sharing. All right, so I am going to share a screen. Bear with me while I get this slideshow pushed forward. All right, so I'm assuming you see my slides. Perfect. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge all of the different ways that you shared, you build connections with families, and just seeing so many different examples of, humor, mutuality, listening, uh, just all the different ways that I saw fellowship, music, food, being centered yourself helps you to connect with families. All of those different ways are amazing ways that we can connect. All right, this is our time together. I think it's important as we move through our time to really understand sometimes what the root causes can be of caregiver resistance. When we're thinking about resistance to resilience, we have to know what sometimes causes that resistance. I'll share some of my own personal examples, but I imagine many of you in this space also may have some of your own personal examples if you too also have your own lived experience. We'll apply some empathy-driven engagement techniques. So we'll talk through not just our own personal experiences, but how do we apply that in an empathy-driven way? And then we'll talk through some incentive strategies, and then how to move forward in building collaborative and sustainable partnership and relationships. So this really is, as I shared and Danae shared, designed to be interactive, but also reflective. So we will take some time to pause for discussion. I may have some questions that will pop into the chat so that we can apply those concepts in some of the real world scenarios that you might encounter in your own practice. So I mentioned I'm a caregiver, and I talked about already just how important that role is in the family system. And so this just highlights that. When caregivers are deeply and authentically engaged, we see higher rates of success for the family because those interventions with the caregivers provide significantly better outcomes. We also see that when caregivers are consistently engaged, that children receive 3 times more consistent support because that the caregivers engage and they have active involvement. And then we also see long-term efficacy and sustainability, meaning those changes are sustained much longer. I started my role in the field as an administrator for a residential treatment center. One of the things that really stood out to me and why I decided to change that and move into wraparound was because we were housing children, working on getting them better in their bubble of being in the residential treatment program. we were failing at doing family work. We were failing at engaging caregivers outside of the one-time weekly phone calls we were making sure they got connected to, and sometimes very minimal family therapy that they were doing. What would happen was we had this intensive treatment program. They would go to school on site. They had lots of gardening and fun activities that they did, and we were in the space of we were doing good rehabilitation, and then they would discharge out of the program, and within 6 months we saw some of them coming back in. And the reason for that was there was no long-term maintenance because the families weren't engaged and the caregivers weren't engaged. And so we did not see long-term sustainable outcomes for our families because the caregivers were missing from that role. I see Diana shared resistance to the moment is the cause of all my suffering. Saying yes, even if I do not like it, opens my life to more possibilities. Thanks for sharing that, Diana. So caregivers are not just folks that should be passive recipients in the intervention process. Our youth and our caregivers both need to be engaged. And I do a lot of training, particularly around child and family teamings. And I do hear sometimes oftentimes when I'll ask a training group, tell me what your biggest challenge is, they say, it's the caregivers. It's the caregivers. I can't seem to get them on board, or they're dismissive of my strength-based approach, or they're right, fill in the blank. So if you have some things you've heard around caregiver engagement, challenges you've experienced, please feel free to drop that in the chat. We also want to troubleshoot some of the real-time things that may be coming up, or barriers or challenges that come up for you. So we have to start with understanding what resistance is and how it might show up, because oftentimes what I hear when I hear I've got a resistant caregiver is that the resistant caregiver doesn't care. They're not invested in their child. They're so frustrated that they're not applying any of the interventions. I see a few. Caregiver doesn't see how serious this is. Yes, Renee. Or I'm sorry, Imelda said that. Imelda said caregiver doesn't see how serious this is. Or caregiver isn't compassion driven and they're severely burned out already. I've tried everything already. Yes. Caregiver says, this isn't something I need to change. It's the child. Just fix the child. Yeah. Dismissing the need that the child needs therapy or counseling. Thank you for offering those in the chat. And we need to unpack those, right? Caregivers are stuck in their own ways. I've never dealt with this in my own children. Yes. Caregivers do not follow through with the services. Absolutely. So those are some really great examples. So thank you. Y'all are taking the words right out of some of the trainings I've been in where that's come across. Resistance and how we framed some of those different quotes that you shared in the chat is usually a symptom of a caregiver being overwhelmed. It's often a symptom of caregivers' previous trauma. Sometimes it is from resource scarcity, and even mismatched expectations. So I expected, right? Like when I adopted my child and we went through the adoption process, I expected a child that would actually be grateful for this adoption. I expected a child who would perform well in school. And I expected that we would, ride off into the sunset with our happy family, because I've now been able to stop the generational trauma that she had been experiencing and her family had experienced, and really be able to just have a healthy family dynamic. That wasn't the case. And so I had a mismatched expectation of what I hoped for and what I was seeing in my real life. I also was overwhelmed, right? My daughter had also experienced previous trauma, and we didn't know where to gather resources. We had an idea and we had started reaching out to some of them based on my professional connections, but there was a lot still missing. And so when we start to reframe resistance as a signal of like, we need to do something different rather than a roadblock, we start to open pathways to have more effective engagement. So now we take a look at these quotes that you all put in the chat. And we're like, oh, this is a signal, not a source of frustration, not a roadblock, but this is a signal, right? So when someone says something like, this isn't about me, these services are for my child. My question is, what is this signaling? And feel free to come off mute or use the chat. This isn't about me. These services are for my child.
To me, it's that they don't see what they're doing to trigger some of the things going on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, they don't see that they're not maybe seeing the full scope, right? They see that their child needs the support, right? But they don't see necessarily maybe their role in, right? So it's signaling maybe some psychoeducation is necessary, right? It's signaling that there needs to be some more coaching for the caregiver so that they can see. Because when my child was not well and she was experiencing depression, by just sharing that I have full permission from her to share these things, I was like, yeah, she's experiencing depression. Like, I knew that I had a role to support that, but I wasn't very clear. I didn't have a lot of clarity on what that was. I was just overwhelmed with those depressive symptoms. So I'm like, yeah, can y'all help me fix this depression? Right? Like, and I need y'all to do it because I'm not depressed. Right. So it signaled that I needed some psychoeducation around depression in the ways that I could help as a caregiver. Right. So that was the signal for me. But folks could have just gotten frustrated and been like, she just doesn't get that what her role is in this. Imelda.
So I have a caregiver who re-entered kiddo's life after like missing the first 10 years just because of where they were at. And now they're reunified and trying to make this work. But kiddo has since had abandonment issues, trauma from guardians, all these other things. And so imagine becoming a new parent for the first time, but your kid has beef with you and you were the person who walked out. And now you're carrying guilt, remorse, shame, you're frustrated, you're angry, your child has severe behavioral challenges, and you missed out the moments when they were soft, squishy, and little, and you could have bonded. And so that caregiver is running into attachment issues. That caregiver is not enjoying their child. That caregiver is like, this isn't my fault. I didn't raise them. And then that statement itself is loaded. Yeah, you didn't raise them, but you're
Yeah.
here now. So I've met resistance in caregivers who were not in the kid's life, and now they're back and they're like, why don't they listen?
Yeah. And so what does that signal for us, right? If we look at it as a roadblock, we're just like, we're stuck in that space. But what it signals is there's previous trauma, likely for not just for the child, but for the caregiver. So that previous trauma needs to be addressed. We need to see, how do we get more resources in for this caregiver so that they can understand how their previous trauma may have now then impacts, right, where they were not parenting this child for a while and now they need some additional resources so that they can. It also means mismatch expectations might be there as well, because they missed that soft squishy time, and now they've got a very angry maybe teenager or young adult who's frustrated with them, and they're also frustrated because of the disconnect that they've had. So now that it's signaling that they also need time to build connection and
And cross
understanding of each
support,
other.
right? Like
Yeah,
therapeutic cross support. So
that's right.
parent caregiver has their therapist working on their previous trauma and issues and how they process losing their child, and then the child processing theirs, and then that cross support so that there's that informed like kind of wraparound of that family,
That's right.
because they're both really emotional and it does take time, and people think that it's just a happy ending, I got my kid back, but it's not, and there's a lot of disappointments to navigate.
Thank you for that, Imelda. Such a good example of, right, like that there's things under the surface and we've got to be able to get to that. But oftentimes, because we've been in such a strong child focused framework, that we're missing the critical component of how caregiver engagement plays such a significant role in that child's success. So their needs, I would say, are just as important as that young child's needs. Because the saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? We need our caregivers to have well-being, just like we need that child to have well-being. They don't live in a vacuum. So if we hit this block of the caregivers not following through on services, then we need to unpack, what is it signaling when they are not engaging in those services or not following through. Maybe it's signaling overwhelm because maybe they've got this long list of things to do and they don't know where to start, and they need someone to meet them where they're at and provide the hurdle help and break down that long list so that they're not overwhelmed and get them one thing to start for. So we've got to start thinking about what are those signals, Diana?
Yeah, I have lived experience of having lost my children and getting them back. And boy, when they came, that was like, it's like Imelda said, you think it's the happy ending when they come home, but these kids have been traumatized. And I was new in recovery, newly learning how to just function in the world, and it was very overwhelming. And I can say that just being able to say that to some caregivers has been able to just open them up and say, yes, it's frustrating. And then they could feel that lived experience, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that has helped me open people up to realize, I said, hey, I needed help. I needed a lot of help. And it was okay when I got it, I got it and I used it and things got better. And, and that's the truth. But I was just like, but I also have a lot of, like, I've had a lot of sponsees that have their children and they're just learning how to, um, parent clean and sober.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's a whole different ball game. It really is. And it's hard. But the most important thing I thought, because I was thinking of what Imelda was talking about, was to not parent with guilt. You can't just go in there and be their friends and fix it that way. It doesn't fix that way. We have to do the work. And but it makes it so much better later. So that's all I would say. I use my lived experience sometimes to help get through the resistance, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's a perfect bridge, and this speaks to why peer partners, both youth advocates and parent partners, peer partners are a part of this transformational process in teaming, because that lived experience can bridge when other maybe professionals in the space are feeling overwhelmed or feeling frustrated with a caregiver. There's something about that lived experience that can bridge some of that gap. But the truth of the matter is, even peers can get frustrated and see resistance as a roadblock instead of a signal, right? Because we're pulling all of the different tricks and strategies out of our toolbox, and ones that have previously worked. And sometimes we work with someone who's everything we're sharing with them, maybe something they're saying is, I've tried that already. I think I saw that in the chat, like, I tried that already, I tried that already, I tried that already. And so I go back to, then what is that signal? What is that signal that I've tried it already statement? And so maybe it's right, like that they're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, and we need to acknowledge that and give them a moment to acknowledge that and say, what are you willing to try differently now, right? Or let's give it a try again, right? Because it's signaling, Diana, that they might be losing hope. Because oftentimes our families are failing up into the system, right? It's not like they started having challenges and they reached out and they were able to get help. They had to have multiple touch points with systems that sometimes didn't work for them very well. And now they're to this point where maybe they're in reunification, or maybe their children were just removed, or maybe their children are in behavioral health services and they started off in school counseling and now it's escalated to the services they're in now, and they're pretty frustrated because none of it had worked previously. All right. So these are just some more of those common root causes of caregiver resistance. You all shared some of them in the chat, and we talked through a couple of examples. But we can't discount system overload. Working with one system, I will say this again, let's just go with behavioral health services, is overwhelming. Right? From access to whether their insurance is correct, to paperwork and packets of information that they receive that they've got to now comb through, on top of maybe 2 jobs and other children that they are also raising, right? Potentially conflicting professional advice from maybe people they're hearing from professionals, plus their friends in their community. All of these things sometimes can create really impossible scheduling and lots of different burdens that they're holding. I'd be also remiss to not talk about historical mistrust. And the reality is, many folks, including myself, have experienced the system, and it wasn't in the way that it was designed for me to experience it. Right? When we think about even our principles of teaming, like strength based support, being collaborative, being culturally responsive. Those are all principles that we should all be holding in our systems of care, but we don't always, that's not always our community's experience. So it makes sense that they have a lot of mistrust because those negative experiences with other providers have created a barrier, right, to me being able to engage with them. That does take time for them to dissolve. So just because you're coming in and you're like, I'm a new provider and I'm going to, show up differently. And I hear you've had these past experiences. That doesn't mean right away they're going to go, oh, okay, I'm so glad for that. Thank you. Now I'm going to share all of my garbage and I'm excited to partner with you and try on every strategy you shared. I'm just going to be, yay. That's just not the reality. There's going to be some hesitancy. And I think that makes sense. And I fully respect that, especially because my own lived experience has shown that I've had similar experiences. And so sometimes there needs to be some time for that trust to build because of those barriers. Sometimes I feel seen as just another talking head. Yeah, Diana. And I do my best not to look like a social worker respectfully. Yeah, because if our community members have had challenges and maybe have lost some of the trust with social workers, we want to be perceived as someone that they can trust. And so that makes sense. And I know you meant that in a very respectful way. And so how do we be seen as more than just a talking head, Diana? Right? It's the proof is in the pudding. I want to see the action. I want to see how you're showing up for me. So if I'm just meeting with you the first few sessions and we've just been talking, and talking works, that's a part of building trust. I also need to see some action too. And so we have to acknowledge that many of our families have had that historical mistrust, not with just systems, but sometimes also based on other identities. So they may have been harmed historically because they were a part of the LGBTQ community, or maybe they're a person of color, or maybe they have neurodiversity. There are many identities that we hold that have had not just mistrust because of us being a part of services, but also because our identities have also caused a significant amount of bias, discrimination, and oppression. And so we have to be able to name those things. You'll hear me, I say name it to tame it if you've been around me for a while. And it's because the more we start to name it and say, how have you experienced other providers? Did they break your trust? Is there anything they did that you don't want me to do? Gives us an opportunity to start to unpack some of those root causes in the ways that we build relationships with them. Yes, Imelda says, yes, name it to tame it. We also know some of the root causes of resistance is also because there's a lot of resource scarcity. Before we even hopped on this list, we started this Zoom, James, Danae, and I were just talking about the SNAP benefits. Right? That's another symptom of resource scarcity, where if I don't know how I'm going to feed my family, if I don't know how I'm going to make that appointment, or even right have basic necessities where I'm going to lay my head at night, how in the hell am I going to apply a strategy? How am I going to take an intervention you're sharing and apply it to my family when I am focused on my most basic needs being met? And so we really have to truly understand on the front end where families are at with their resources, so that we can first see if there's an opportunity to put some time and effort into making sure their resources are set and their most basic needs are set before we move them into strategy and intervention. And then the last one that's highlighted here just talks about misaligned expectations. And that's that they might have different cultural frameworks. So one of the things that I often share, if you've been around with me, I talk about we're McVegans. We'll say we don't eat, right? We don't eat McDonald's. We don't eat a lot of fast food, right? Like there's a lot of different ways that we show up. We're very crunchy granola in my family, is the best way to put it. And when we had services, we had someone as a reward take my kid to get a McDonald's milkshake. And it was a big no-no. That's a big, huge cultural framework of our family that wasn't honored. right? And so that professional recommendation of getting a sweet treat for good behavior is not in our framework, right? When you have good behavior, you're rewarded not with food, because we didn't want food to be a incentive in our family. We wanted food to just be something that nourishes our body. So it really requires us to really meet the families and understand their cultural frameworks, understand what their priorities are, so that we don't have a misalignment of I see y'all are teasing me in the chat here. Almond moms, country granola glows. Yes, I'll accept all of those things. But it really requires us to really make sure that we are matching with them culturally, not expecting them to match with us. So if your family's culture was one where you did a great job and at the end of the week you took your kids to get ice cream, that's fantastic. But you want to really make sure that you're asking the families what their incentives look like, and make sure that you understand what their priorities are. That also speaks to at times where we have priorities. We see the family like maybe cursing and yelling at each other. I know me and Danae are both curse-in families, and can speak to that, right? And so you might come in going, "Ooh, there's a lot of chaos," and "Oh, Danae really shouldn't be cursing in front of her children. How terrible is that?" But that's not the family's priority. They just curse up a storm, and that's fine because that's who they are. That's not a priority for them to work on that. And so that's another thing that sometimes we see resistance, because the priorities that we're setting for the families is not the priorities they've set for themselves. And so they're perfectly fine with that level of cursing and chaos. What they're really focused on, say, is the depression, right, that's existing, or maybe the self-harm that's showing up. And they're wanting us to really focus there. And they don't see the cursing as a symptom of those things. And if they're all in agreement with that, then that's where we meet them where they're at. As long as I'm not cursing at you. Yes, yes, it's all good. You can curse at me, just don't cut me, Imelda said. All right. And so let me go back and make sure, any other common causes of caregiver resistance anyone else wants to highlight? Just recognizing there's so much expertise in this space. I don't want to move on without anyone else if there's anyone else that wants to highlight maybe what comes up around this caregiver resistance that we need to also honor.
Health
Emily,
problems within.
thank you for your share, Ebony. I heard someone else speaking. I wanted to give them the floor if so. My name is Taisha, and I work with First Hope, which is an early intervention and prevention and first episode psychosis program in Contra Costa County.
Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you for sharing um, about the cultural framework and cultural, just being aware of like what families' expectations are, and using the example of like, if Danae family curses, then that's, their norm, which is not, shouldn't be what a provider or caregiver comes in, or um, should I say, a supporter of those that may be working with the family coming in and, having their judgments upon. But one of the things that I wanted to thank you for was your language, right? Like, because I think language is another big part about how caregivers can sometimes present as resistant in that label, like in the way that the clinical model, and when you're receiving services from a lot of different systems of care, in the way that people write notes and they talk about things from a clinical perspective, language is a big part of what creates barriers in the process of providing them the supports they need. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, because it is about meeting youth and young folks and those that you work with or work for, being considerate of language.
Yeah. Thank you for elevating that, and just how important language is, because that even speaks to even our notes. All of us have to document, right? Like when we're meeting with the family and talking about the interaction that we've had with them, or the session that we've had with them. And so sometimes we'll even see in the notes, like, caregiver continues to be resistant. It's like, that should not be how the caregiver is described. Be very specific in how why are they resistant. It's the same as when I was in residential, I used to see a note that would say youth was angry and left the table, and I'm like, well, can you be more specific, right? And then it's like youth was angry and because they didn't get their because they were told they had to put their food away, right? Like, and then it was like, okay, well, let's get a little bit more specific, right? And it was like youth was still the last one eating at the table, and the staff told them they needed to finish in 1 minute or their food was going to be thrown away. Well, no wonder they were angry, right? Like, this gives us more language to better understand what was happening. And now I'm going to the staff and saying, why would you tell that young person that they only had 1 minute left to eat, right? Why couldn't they just stay at the table until they finish their food? And so language does, right, being able to clearly describe what's happening gives us those signals for when we need to think about how we need to change our approach versus asking, creating narrative around a family member or caregiver.
Because we also have experienced different presentations, right? What looks like anger to one may be what you call, for me, may be a cultural, it may not be me being angry. It just may be a cultural way in which maybe I communicate in my family. So what you may perceive as me being angry, maybe that's another area of where culturally there's something different in maybe the way that I may, show an emotion different to where the way maybe someone else shows an emotion. And maybe it's not anger at all. Like you said, that's the perception maybe. And it could be observed as something different.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that as well. And I think that goes back to historical mistrust, because research shows that when a child is removed from a family, and this has been researched across not just California but across the United States, when a white mother has her child removed, and she's screaming and yelling, "Don't take my child! What are you doing?" Her court assessment talks about how she's overwhelmed and sad about the removal of her child. However, when a Black mom or a person of color is described and they were screaming the same things, "Don't take my child, what are you doing?" they're being described as aggressive, angry, and then they also now have in their case plan that they need to take anger management. This is why there's historical mistrust in our systems, and why certain identities have a long-standing distrust, because it's rightfully so, because how they've been described, how they've been perceived, and even their parenting styles, which often stem from protection around society, have really caused them to not really trust caregivers. I'm not sorry, caregivers, but other professionals when it comes to how they're able to collaborate with them. Imelda.
Someone else in the chat mentioned the generational gaps, but I also wanted to introduce the concept of misaligned expectations and system overload and historical mistrust as it pertains to multi-generational cultures, where there's a very tribe mindset and you have 3 to 4 generations living in the same home. And if you go in there with a Western worldview and maybe a little whitewashed, you're thinking every kid needs their own room and everyone should have their own bed. And why is little kid sleeping with the grandma on the same bed? Why is there co-sleeping happening? Why are meals always at the same, like there's a lot of differences there. And sometimes within those generational gaps, I can have, let's say, for example, if an abuelita or a grandma is the main caregiver, but her biological children, aunts and uncles, they've departed maybe from her faith, and she's very faith-based, and now they've gone to university, they've got degrees, and they're talking down to the main caregiver in the same household. You've got to look at what caregiver is dealing within the schema of their own family. And it's not our job to modernize abuelita and tell her that her faith and her identity and her ethnicity is wrong because she's not educated in like her children and she put through college as a single mother, right? It's making this bridge and these gaps and these brave communication conversations happen at the table with them while breaking bread, while letting the curse words fly and the tears flow, and saying she is the caregiver. You may have departed from how you were raised, you're still in the same house, but she's going to choose to raise this child in the same way. And these are her parental rights, right? And so being those cultural brokers at times, especially like to me, it's like it's a passion and a joy of mine to go in with those Latino families, to go in with those Native families, to go in with South Asian families, families that are like, it's 3, 4 generations under one roof, and you've got a caregiver fighting through a lot of generational gaps and tensions. And so they're overloaded. I mean, they're veterans, right? They've raised 2 or 3
Yeah.
generations
Yeah.
already. And you're a grandma Ebony,
Yep.
So, we can't dismiss Abuelita when she's there. Her voice and her choice matters just as much. And just because she can't text or do text to talk doesn't mean she doesn't have a pen and paper and her calendar ready to go to do that calendaring and keep her family organized. So there's a lot that our caregivers go through if we just take a look at their family schema and then honor their position within their own family.
That's right. Such a good point, Imelda, and others echoed that in the chat. I really appreciate you bringing that into this space. I also appreciate Taisha, Diana, both naming fathers as well, who are also underrepresented in human services in general. And there's a lot of bias in our child serving systems for fathers because we are a woman-dominated field, but courts align more with mothers. We just see it. I mean, research proves it. And shout out to our parent partners, our peer partners who are our fathers and are able to be cultural brokers in that regard. But we all have a role to play, very similar to anything when we're thinking about equity, to think about who's missing from these conversations, who's underrepresented, who receives that, who has that historical mistrust. If I was a father, I wouldn't trust the system because I know that oftentimes it's sometimes stacked against me when it comes to my level of engagement. And so being able to name those things is really important because we can't, again, name it to tame it. We can't work through it if we're not naming it. Thank you all for sharing that. All right. So our empathy framework just says that we're going to lean into practicing that as whether you have your own lived experience or not. I always say one of the things we used to do when we oriented new hires at the organization I used to work at, or I still support at times, but that's Stanford Sierra Youth and Families, is when we did our family and youth partnership orientation, we would ask anyone who was joining, regardless of the program or department they're in, to name a time where they've experienced a challenge or reached a barrier. And the reason we did that is because, very similar to peer partners, everyone has some form of lived experience. Everyone has something that they've navigated. If you've been able to get to the big age you're at now, and I don't know what that age is, since everyone's at different ages in this space, and have not had any challenges in your entire life, wow, hats off. I'd love for you to raise your hand. We're going to hold a party and figure out how you got there. But the reality is we all have some form of lived experience, some challenge that we've come across in our lives. And empathy is more than, as it says here, a soft skill. It's a tool that can transform resistance into partnership, but it requires us to do some very specific things to shift that dynamic. And I always want the dynamics that I have between myself and anyone that I'm in community with to feel relational, not transactional. I don't want to feel like I'm just someone you're coming in with your clipboard and checking things off with. I want to feel connection. Our humanness thrives on connection. It thrives on that. And so it requires us to think about how we can first listen to understand rather than listening to respond. So that's one of the core practices, is really, right, setting aside our agenda, whatever that is, right? We know sometimes there are times where I've come in and I'm like, all right, I've got to get this cans done today with the family. And then I walk in and there is something going on and I have to put that agenda aside and come back the next day or come back later that week, because in that moment, the caregiver or the family needed me to show up differently. And I couldn't come in with the agenda that I had. I had to suspend that temporarily so that I could really, truly understand where the caregiver was at, what their reality was, what their concerns were, and also take time to listen for strengths, even if they weren't sharing them with me. Yes, Diana said pivot. Absolutely. But that requires us to first listen. And then we need to also validate. right? And I think it's simple to say like, oh yeah, I had to validate that parents or that caregiver's experiences. But sometimes validation can be so much so, wow, that must have been hard for you. And we're talking about going deeper than just, okay, thank you. Wow, thank you for sharing that with me. That's got to be difficult. It means slowing our pace, really truly slowing our pace to acknowledge that the difficulty of their situation and really take time to legitimize their feelings so that they can feel safe and open enough to really do the work. And so that does at times require us to slow down a bit when we're having that, yes, have sincerity, as Diana said. And then the last one is that we're collaborating instead of being prescriptive. So we always say our caregivers are the experts. I think we say it so much that sometimes we forget it, right? Because it becomes something we actually just say instead of something we actually do. And collaborating rather than prescribing means we're in true partnership and really co-creating solutions. So we're not consulting and saying, here's what we came up with. Here's the treatment objectives. What do you think? That's consulting. That's not co-creating. It means we're slowing down enough to really, really allow partnership to drive our next steps with families. Yes, active and reflective listening and talking with them every step of the way. I'm checking chat here, making sure. Yes, lead with curiosity. Absolutely, Imelda. Yes, people love when they know when it's authentic. I always say our families are the best BS detectors because they've been BS'd a lot in their lives. So if you're coming in and you're just ready to check some boxes and do a cookie cutter stamp on your approach, our families can experience, they feel it, they've experienced it before, and it's already going to create a blockage for them to be able to connect with you. So when we're in true partnership, we're collaborating on every step of the way. All right, so here are some of those empathy-driven engagement techniques. So a few things this is something that we hope everyone is doing. We always start with the strengths. Some of that, it comes naturally for us, but in all honesty, we are a problem-focused society. So it actually makes sense. And this is going to be something that's a shift for our caregivers because I've been in many meetings, one-on-ones, talk with other just parents in general. And our go-to is to start with the challenges. It's how our society has actually been acculturated. Like we start with what's wrong, not with what's good. And so when we start the conversations by identifying what the caregiver is doing well, it really does shift the dialogue. I was observing a child and family team meeting probably about 4 months ago. And there was a few things that were missing in that meeting. One, the caregiver was not prepped well. So the meeting started and there was an agenda, but they actually hadn't been framed in the wraparound principles. So no one had talked with them about being strength-based, outcomes-focused, family voice and choice, team-focused, persistent, right? Like all of the individualized, all of that wasn't broken down. So when they started with what's working well, the caregiver immediately said, I'm going to tell you what's not working well. It makes sense. They didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about what was well because they hadn't been oriented to the wraparound and child and family teaming approach and philosophy. So we've got to be able to prepare families and make sure that they understand, hey, we start with strengths because whatever your agency's philosophy is and your teaming philosophy is. This is why we do that. I like to also say research shows when we start naming all the things you're doing well, things shift and transform in your family. So I'm giving the why behind why I'm starting with strengths, right? Not just this is what we're going to do and we always do it this way and this is how we team, but why do we do it? Why is it important for your family? That way, when we start it, we oftentimes can stop them from going, and I'll tell you what's wrong, what's not working. But even if they do, we can gently remind the why behind it, and we start to see shifts. So with that CFT I was observing, we were able to pause the CFT and explain to the caregiver why we have a strengths-based approach. And then immediately after we started that strengths-based approach, we were able to identify all the strengths of the caregiver. We were like, wow, you keep showing up. Your child just broke a television, right? Threw it down the stairs in frustration, and you stayed committed. You are missing work right now, and we know that that is really tough to do, right? Like to continue to try to support your child, you've been adjusting your schedule, right? Like to make sure that their needs are met, and immediately that caregivers what someone would perceive as resistance, it was signaling they needed to be valued, they needed to be seen, they needed to be recognized for how they were fighting for their lives, literally in that moment for their child. And once that happened, the conversation shifted immediately. And when we said, now what's working for your child, they had 10 things to say. Whereas before, they were like, I just want to focus on what's not working. And so we see those shifts. Imelda.
I remember observing or shadowing one of my very, very, very first CFTs, and grandparents were caregivers, and they walked in and we started doing strengths based, and the grandma lost it. She just threw a tantrum, walked out of the CFT, was bawling her eyeballs out, full snot in the hallway, and people were like, "You want to go get her?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I'm like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "I can't believe you guys start with all this BS. Do you know the thousands of dollars of damage that this kid just did to my home? And you guys are like, yay! Oh my God, they used their words. And oh, they're
Mhm.
doing so well." And she was just livid at the report from the family partner, livid about what the youth advocate was saying. Like everyone was cheering this kid on, and she's like in turmoil. She's
Yeah.
got like a fat bill to pay and all these expenses to coordinate. And someone else in chat mentioned sometimes kinship placement is not their choice. Like they're like, there's this obligation or duty to show up as grandparents. But she's like, and I can't be a grandma. And I hate that I can't be grandma while they destroy my house. And like that was a real lament. But she didn't understand, like I don't know if she didn't understand or she just didn't agree, but in that moment that CFT opened my eyes. So like they really need to be prepared
Yeah.
to go in there. We're not going to overlook the concerns and the challenges. We're just going to use grace and truth, with grace being the anesthesia and truth being the scalpel. But we'll get to the scalpel part, grandma. Don't worry, we'll
Yes.
hear you out. We will validate the truth of your house damage and
Right.
these anger outbursts and your difficulties, your barriers. But let's start, like, let's start with those strengths for this reason. Sugar makes the medicine go down.
That's
Mary
right.
Poppins said it best.
Yes.
And so yeah, I learned a lot just from observing my very first CFT when a caregiver just had it, and they
Yeah.
were like done with how we like sunshine and lollipops
Yep.
CFT. And I was
Yep.
like, no, it's not. It's not. And she was valid.
She was valid. Absolutely. Her anger signaled that we missed some steps, right? That we missed some critical steps of preparing the family so that they could engage in a conversation about strengths without and that we were going to get to the thousands of damage that had happened, right? And right, I had those similar feelings. Like when we had our first meeting, I was like, what, like y'all so bright and shiny, like we got problems that need to be addressed, right? I needed to be prepared and prepped on the framing and the approach so that I could understand how that works, and then also maybe even get feedback around how how I would like it approached, so that I didn't feel like my experiences were not validated in that moment. And thanks, Donna, for sharing. There is grief experienced by kin caregivers. They are no longer their original role, whether it's a grandparent or aunt or uncle, and now they're a parent, and it is a loss. Absolutely. And so sometimes what does that signal? It signals that they need space to grieve, right? One of I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the support group format of educate, equip, support, ease, but like the very first session is grief. And that's for any parent, because what they expected, this goes back to the mismatch expectations, what they expected when they knew that they wanted to have children, or maybe they were placed into a position where they were pushed into taking on a family member, or, and now, right, is that there's mismatched expectations there, right? Like what they thought is not what's happening, right? And so I needed that, right? I expected when I adopted my child, I didn't expect that she was going to struggle with depression as much as she did. I didn't expect that she was going to start self-harming. And so when it happened, I needed space to grieve, and I needed someone to check in with me and say, this has to be hurt. You also have to be hurting like she's hurting too, right? And that's where I needed someone to also then highlight some of my strengths as well, and say, but look at you continuing to be persistent, reaching out for services, and staying consistent with your family. And then there's others here as well. Starting with the strengths is just one step of that. And I appreciate everyone's examples in the chat and coming off of mute. But we also need to ask for permission. Our strategies and approaches are our strategies and approaches. If we are offering suggestions, we should start with the question, would it be helpful if I shared some strategies with you? Would you be open to hearing it? Really give space to respect their autonomy, but they also, when asked, I've been hearing this phrase lately, start with a small yes. And starting with a small yes is something as simple as, can I chat with you for a moment, or do you have time to chat with me? It's a small yes, but it's a yes that then opens up the receptivity to someone recommending something or talking through something with someone. And so we want to take time to be able to ask for that permission and start with that small yes before we dive into what we'd like to do, or what we think might be a good something for the caregiver to try on. And I recently asked a mom if she wanted to share some solutions, and she said, no, I want to sit in this for a while. I'm hurt. And yeah, absolutely, Jess. Of course you're hurt. Thank you for sharing with me that you want to sit in this for a while. Because sometimes when things have happened, I don't immediately want to go to solutions. Sometimes I need a minute with my emotions and what I'm navigating and sit with it before I move to emotion, to strategy, because I need to feel what's happening for a second. And the feelings also and emotions help for me to drive to change. But if I'm immediately going to change, sometimes that doesn't let me come up with good strategy because I haven't had a moment to sit with what I'm experiencing. So that makes complete sense that that family needs that time. Yeah, Rose, to be able to process it.
And especially if you've been dealing with a lot of systems, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, Ebony, systems, right? So there's always this work that is being done. And with service providers, right? Like you have a provider, I'm the receiver of what should be happening, and I'm all constantly being told and recommended of all the things to do. And like you said, instead of having someone partner with you to say, I'm here to listen, how are you? How have things been? How is your week going? And when you said using words to get a small yes, creating a space where they can come in and talk about what they want to talk about and have the space to be heard and not always feeling like there's an agenda of the thing that needs to be fixed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, that speaks to that so eloquently. Thank you for that. Right. Like we're not coming in with an agenda. We're just holding that space to just hear them and be there to open the conversation, to offer, or maybe not offer anything if that's what they're wanting, but we're allowing them to lead that conversation.
At least as a way to possibly bridge rapport for the strategies and the interventions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, and I see Jess said, I do the same for myself. I give myself the rest of the day to feel feelings and then I'll move on. And Imelda said, that's good emotional intelligence and standing in your emotions. Agreed. And then the third one we see here is that we're doing some normalizing of struggles, because many families do have similar experiences and similar challenges. They're not exactly the same, but the goal of normalization is not to dismiss, but to reduce shame and isolation. I remember sharing when I first started experiencing a lot of challenges with my family. I used to tell folks I couldn't just, go to the break room and be at the water cooler and people say, how was your weekend? And I said, oh, I had to file 2 missing persons reports, and right, and because she took off and I didn't know where she was at. And then, she came home, I was worried about her cutting. And so, I kept on checking in on her room, and she was annoyed with me because I kept on knocking on the door and she wouldn't let that was not water cooler talk. I was isolated by that. Little did I know there were lots of other families who were experiencing some of those things. And it was nice to be able to be in community, whether that was support groups, whether someone was just sharing, hey, you're not alone, right? There's lots of folks who are also experiencing this. But I also needed some support normalizing some of the typical teenage things that she was doing that I then pathologized as mental health needs, right? And so there's a couple of things I think as we're helping parents and caregivers navigate, because everything that she did was then catastrophized into, right, a challenge that connected back to her treatment versus like, oh, these are some typical milestones. Guess what? Teenagers lie. Teenagers are impulsive. Teenagers might have sticky fingers and still things that don't belong to them, right? Like this is all a part of like healthy child development. And then what happens is they become involved in systems, and then the systems then overly pathologize some of those behaviors, and the parents do too. And so, really making sure that gets normalized for the families to reduce that shame. I see Melda uses humor, right, to help. And I saw a lot of folks in the chat when we asked what's one way you bridge with families. Humor is one of those ways. So she said she's on the Hot Mess Express train. And I definitely use Hot Mess Express as well, Melda. So you're not alone there. I'll say I was a hot mess express when this happened for me, especially as someone with lived experience. Like, how are you managing it? How are you dealing with it? Can break that. And then in addition to asking for permission, offering choices. So instead of like, can I offer some ideas is a great way to start. And then instead of just like one strategy that you're offering, giving multiple options. Everyone likes having multiple options. There's a reason why Baskin Robbins has not went out of business, because those 31 flavors is real. Like you like getting, even if you know every time you're going and getting cookies and cream, which is what I'm going to get every single time, I still want to know I have the option to get mint chocolate chip and whatever else there is. And if you got a favorite ice cream that's against cookies and cream, like go ahead and put it in the chat, but I'm going to judge you. So having the multiple choices helps our families to be able to also have autonomy and ownership around what I want to select, what I get to choose. I'm choosing what works for me out of this array of offerings that you've come up with or that we've come up with together. We have the right to change our minds. 31 flavors all day, any day. Yes. See, gold medal ribbon. Okay. Don't even know what that is. But good for you, Tisha. I see a coffee and espresso chip. Yes. So the offerings, right? The same as when we go into Burger King and they say you can have it your way. Why is that such? There are certain taglines that let people know I get to have it how I'm wanting it, and no one's going to stop me from that. And that matters for our families as well when it comes to services, especially when there's been historical mistrust and right like and people have been telling them this is how you need to do things, this is what you need to do to better take care of your child. Yeah, Diana said we can think out of the box to find more choices. Absolutely. I've never heard of pineapple coconut either. See, lots of good flavors happening here that we get to open our eyes to. And then the last one is following their lead. So letting the caregivers set priorities on what matters to them. So after they've had a chance to look at this array of strategies, you've got a small yes. Now, what do you think is the first step in navigating that strategy? What do you think would work best for you? Right? Buy-in comes when it feels like it's relevant to them, when they feel there's a piece of ownership and autonomy that they get to have. All right. Quick question, because I know I've been talking. I appreciate everyone else who's been sharing as well. Oh, black walnut. That sounds delicious, Taisha. What is one strength you've observed in a caregiver you're currently working with? What is one strength you've observed in a caregiver? Let's shout out our caregiver strengths. Let's take a quick pause and shout out our caregiver strengths. Listen, listen, listen. Yeah, resilience. Strength in a current caregiver, contrition and deep humility. Such amazing traits. Perseverance, resilience, humility. So many good things. Willingness, determined. Yes, keep showing up. Kindness, empathy, passionate, patient, open-minded approach with willingness to integrate new ideas. Yes, I love these. Resourceful, resilience. Hey, miracle, courage, humility, dedication. These are fantastic, generous, open to change. Oh my gosh. I love this waterfall of strengths in the chat. It makes my heart happy. And like, I just can't encourage enough taking these back, right? And every week, every interaction, right? Like, there's so many different ways we can engage with these strengths. Maybe it's setting, 15 minutes of your week to text all your caregivers exactly what you just put in the chat and say, hey, I know we're just getting our Mondays. This is a Monday. We're just getting the week started. I just want to acknowledge your strength of this. I'm looking forward to our session on Thursday. Like, what a powerful way for a caregiver to start the week, to hear something amazing about them that opens their hearts and lets them know that you see them, that you value their acceptance of others and their open communication and their consistency and their generosity and their compassion and their resilience, right? Like, just by way of doing that, we shift our culture, we shift the dynamics and connection with someone. And so if you can think about maybe one way you might be able to bring that into your space on a more consistent basis. What is one way outside of child and family team meetings and outside of those one-on-one sessions? Maybe it's a text message. Very something small can have a really big impact. I see Diana shared, after completing my family's evaluation questions with caregivers, I try to ask if there's anything else about them they think is important for me or the department to know. One recently told me she wanted us to know everything they do. They try their best. They want the best for their child. They had a special needs child unexpectedly in their care. I appreciate hearing that from the caregiver. That's great. So yeah, that's great, Diana. Asking an additional question, like, what is something you want us to know, you think is important for us to know? And what an amazing, they felt comfortable and safe enough to share that they're trying their best and they want the best for their child. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, so starting with strengths, as it says here on the screen, it's not just about being nice. It activates the caregiver's sense of competence. It says, I see you, and it creates a foundation of trust that can make difficult conversations possible. So imagine week to week, you were starting the week off on Mondays, texting all your caregivers and saying, I'm just naming this strength because I see you, boo, and you're doing a great job. Can't wait for our session on Thursday. And then 4 weeks later, you've been doing this now for a month. They feel seen and valued, and now you've hit a challenge. Their young person was struggling, and the caregiver may have not responded in the way they want to, and they've been beating themselves up, and maybe they feel a little closed off and not feeling like they really want to have the conversation at a child and family team meeting. But because you've been laying such a strong foundation of trust by valuing them and seeing them and activating their sense of competence, when it's time to have those hard conversations, they're like, I already know you see me. You've been messaging me every week. Every time we connect, you talk about my strengths. So I know when I make this mistake, when I've made this mistake or I've messed up, that you still trust in my abilities. We're just working through this and navigating this challenge together. What a beautiful offering that is for a family member. All right. All right. So there are going to be times that resistance is right. As we said, it's going to give us a signal like, hey, it's time to do something different. Right. So we recognize the signal. So we're noticing the missed appointments or incompletion of task. Who's had a child and family team meeting and the parent or caregiver has a task, and then 2 weeks later you show up and they're like, nope, didn't do it. There's a couple of things. One, I'm not waiting 2 weeks to find out if they've done it. I'm checking with them in between and seeing how they're doing. So I would encourage that. But we know what happens, right? They don't get it done. Maybe they've got some defensive body language or meeting with them arms crossed. We all know body language speaks more than words. They just seem really closed off. We're recognizing that signal as there is an underlying need, very similar that we would do with our youth, very similar that we would do with our partners. This does not, by saying we do it with our youth, it doesn't paternalize us by asking about a caregiver's underlying needs. We should be looking at everyone's underlying needs because it helps us to understand them better. So instead of getting critical, we get curious. We ask open-ended questions. So if they didn't finish a task from one meeting to the next, we say, what got in the way? Or what would make following through on this easier for you? We're approaching it with curiosity about their experience, not critical, judgment. How, like, right? Like, tell me what would have made it easier, and how might we have done something? Is there anything I could have done differently that would have made this easier for you? So that's that really open approach. And then we problem solve together. We do some problem solving, like, what do you think might work better? And it respects their ability to have expertise in their own life, because we're not just immediately jumping in with our strategy that could work better. We're asking them first. It's okay that they might say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, because that's when we start with that small yes of, tell me, would it be okay if I shared some of my thoughts with you on this? And it still respects their expertise in their own life. Tiana said my supervisor sounds just like this in consult. Yes, it is actually it's a leadership approach as well, because leaders shouldn't be leading from the I've got all the answers, here you go, now execute. Leaders should be co-creating as well. And so if you're hearing that in consult, Diana, it sounds like you've got a good leader that respects your autonomy and your expertise and partners with you as a colleague and not as someone who just should be doing the work. All right. Yes, and Imelda said there's always a hidden dimension to people. We don't know everything about them. They do. They can choose to keep their cards close to their chest or face up. It's their expertise. Absolutely. Oh, I was their mentor. Oh, interesting. Oh, that's good to know, Diana. All right. The power of meaningful incentives. And so incentives are not just the gift cards, right? Who knows? I'm always like, enough with the gift cards. I think they can be a fantastic way to honor someone's time financially, but it's not the only thing that should be driving them to the table. If I'm asking for feedback on a document, I want them to give me feedback on a document because they're invested in whatever that document is that's going out into the community, not because they're getting a gift card for it, right? And so effective incentives really address needs, recognize effort, and also build motivation, intrinsic motivation, meaning their own internal motivation over time. And so there's lots of things that work. I'd love to hear if you all have some as well, in regards to how you might design an incentive that, or you have incentives that you do that currently work well to motivate caregivers. To the left of the screen, you see tangible incentives like get gas cards or bus passes so that they can have transportation, grocery cards to meet their basic needs, flexible scheduling, food provided in meetings, heavy on food provided at child, break the bread with them. Talk with your team if they're feeling hesitant about breaking bread with families. What a great way to reduce, increase engagement and reduce maybe some of the awkwardness by just sharing a meal. Books and resources for the family to do some self-learning may also be a great incentive. But there's also what we call the intrinsic motivators. And I think both can exist, right? One doesn't have to exist with the other. Oh, Donna, I see your little kitty cat baby. She's just like loving it in your lap. So these intrinsic motivators recognize families for their expertise and effort, right? They feel brought in and they're excited about being brought in. They see that their expertise matters. They see that their efforts mattered and they're being validated in it. They see progress. So even, my child is now starting to, what I feel like is getting better. And that's an intrinsic motivator for me, right? Because naturally, if I'm giving my kiddo, he's 18, he started college, he's now starting to date, right? When I give him dating advice, and I see him apply it and he appreciates it, it's an intrinsic motivator for me to give more advice and for him to trust me because he now trusts that the advice I gave him worked, right? And so that's intrinsic. He's like motivated by these interactions that we're having now that focus on him developing romantic relationships with other people, right? And so there's something intrinsic that's there that helps them, right? Whether that's now they've got increased confidence in their parenting. I do now, right? Like he's like, yes, that was great advice. Tell me more. I feel confident that I'm giving him good advice. There's a sense of partnership and shared purpose, but also there's hope for that child's future. Danae.
Yeah, anytime when I was doing direct service, the team would suggest doing an incentive for the youth. I would immediately suggest, great, let's have the caregiver implement it. Because then that way it's doing exactly what Lahoma was speaking to, that's sustainable, right? So now
Yes.
we're creating a sustainable intervention. We're building that relationship of trust and change between the kiddo and the caregiver, and we're taking ourselves out of it. Like, give them the opportunity to do it. So if we might be providing the incentive, but mom's the one implementing it and giving it to the baby.
That's
That was
right.
always very, very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, good. That's good stuff. Jess said I try to make things fun for the mom. Sometimes, for example, I'm hosting a cookie exchange for a mom going through a tough time right now. She loves it. It's taking her mind off what she has going on, and we'll show her how many people from our office care about her. That's great. That's great. Yeah, Imelda. Yeah.
Sometimes I do mirroring, like if I know I have a mom that's just overwhelmed or neurodiverse. I have a mom, she's got like 5 kiddos, and sometimes I walk in her living room and I'm like, "How's your day?" And she's like, and I'm like, "Hey girl, like let me help pick some of these baby bottles off the floor and like give me some socks to fold." And so my hands are moving and we're sitting on the couch and she makes herself a cup of coffee and she's debriefing with me, and it's just 15 minutes of a little simple act of service. But for
Yeah.
that mom, me just pairing little baby socks, which is like I need to fidget too,
Yeah.
picking up the baby socks, or just picking up the floor or whatever, folding her little baby blankets. She's like, I have her heart because I'm not
Mhm.
just showing up and walking over her mess and being like, okay, tell me about your day. I'm
Yep.
like coming into her day with her. And we have a fantastic working relationship now. And it just started with me not being like, ooh, there's just some mess in here. It's like, oh girl, give me some little socks. We're gonna fold these up. Don't worry. And
That's
having like a
right.
basket full of folded clean laundry at the end of our meeting. She was way more
Right.
open once she didn't feel judged or like she was failing at hosting or having someone over in her house just yet again.
Right, right. That's huge, Imelda. Such a wonderful approach. I cannot tell you how many socks and other laundry I folded while sitting in the house with the family so they know they're not alone in their chores and we're just shooting the breeze and talking and connecting, but they see a sense of connection and like shared responsibility, and that the burden's just not theirs to hold in that moment. So I love that. She's gonna have laundry waiting for you, Rosette. She's like, oh, I'll wait for laundry until Miss Imelda's coming by the house. um, yeah, so I love that. I love that. So when we're thinking about designing an incentive strategy, especially as we're thinking about both the tangible motivators, but also the intrinsic motivators, the first thing to do is just to ask the caregiver what matters to you, right? What matters and what's going to be most helpful. Oftentimes our go-to is the gift card or a bus pass, right? But their own answers might actually surprise you and give you a different type of solution you hadn't yet considered. And so we don't want to assume what would be most helpful to them. We need to ask them. And if they don't know, that's okay. If they don't know the answer to that, you can ask them, can I ask a question, right? Small ask, small yes. Would it be okay if we just tried on a bunch of different types of incentives, right? Like I'd like to, like let's try different ones and see what works best for you. And so everyone benefits from incentives, whether they're intrinsic motivators or tangible. We also want to think about how we can remove any barriers. So we don't want to, add an incentive without making sure that there is barriers to making them their participation logistically possible. So sometimes it is the gas card or bus passes because they're trying to come to an in-person support group, and that's the barrier. So we're eliminating that obstacle, but that's not that shouldn't be the incentive and the incentive alone. That's simply just removing a barrier. So sometimes I'll tell folks, like, they're like, oh, we're doing these gift cards, and I'm like, that's just giving them the gas money to get there, right? But what else is motivating them intrinsically to get there? Is there anything else? And have you asked that question? And then lastly, we want to celebrate the small wins. I know when we're talking about child and family teaming, we talk about, that transition is when we're doing a lot of the celebration. But what we really have learned in our child and family teaming approaches is that the celebration in the transition phase doesn't just happen there. It should be happening at every juncture. We're engaging. We feel connected. I feel like you're trusting me more. Let's celebrate that, right? Like, oh my gosh, I know, we don't want like Imelda's person being like, stop celebrating all of these things when these big things are happening. So it's not to dismiss. It may be one-on-one conversations with the caregiver. Can we just pause to celebrate that, like, they got suspended from school, and usually, right, like, your response is to shut down completely, but this time you showed up and you were more open to explore some of the options than you were before, right? So these small successes help to build momentum towards some of the larger goals, and then that in turn also helps us to build more towards autonomy. So it shifts those external rewards to internal satisfaction, because they're continuing to see the benefit for them and their family versus sometimes those first immediate ones, which may have been the gift cards or tangible ways to engage. And they're not dependent on those external things. They're really just dependent on internal. And I always say, I want, like, when we're talking about when I'm talking about my kids, I'm always like, I want you to do it because it's the right thing to do, right? Like, not because I'm getting you a milkshake at the end of the week. I want you to feel internally motivated. And sometimes those external motivators get that started, then they see the benefit of when they're doing it this certain way. And now they're then motivated internally to continue to do it. I'm loving the ways y'all are talking in the chat. Your own internal motivators. Maybe it's your pets or furry. I think Melda's calling your cat furry fidget. Done. All right. So let's take a moment to just do a quick. Let me do a time check. How are we doing on time? Let me do a time check. We're doing good. All right. All right, so this is a good moment for reflection, but I also want to stop and see if there's any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing slides for just a moment so I can see folks. I don't know if y'all can see me. If you don't want to see my big face pinned to the front of your screen, if you click the corner of your screen, there's an option to click gallery, and then we can all see each other in this moment. Or I can be unpinned for this quick slide break if you'd like. But does anyone have any questions so far, or any feedback or strategies that have worked particularly well for them? Again, this is our all teach, all learn. You're not in an echo series, but it should feel like a very collaborative space. Any questions, reflections so far?
I have something that tends to work with me when I'm getting to know families, like when we're doing assessments and everything. It's not always about asking the 7 questions directly. I also ask them, is there anything else that they feel would be important that I need to know regarding their family goals and journey? And it just opens up the conversation for what, instead of us naming what we think is important to the process, it gives them the open floor to say what really is their goal and their focus.
I love that. Starting with what are their needs. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tisha.
I wanted to share. So I'm a bit older, and when I think back to, I'm thinking way back when I started in the system, how there were no financial supports and very little resources. And then I went on to be a parent advocate for the DSCS program in 2005, and I was one of the first ones to start it. And then again, there were no financial aid we did a lot of researching and hands-on support. And throughout the years, I've noticed that a lot more programs have gained access and is able to provide financial support and a lot more resources actually. But I also noticed that, and maybe I am guilty of this a little bit, and this training has helped me see a bigger picture and open my eyes to it, of some of our families getting a little bit spoiled and depending on that financial support, wanting it, not only needing it, but wanting it and demanding it, expecting it. And then I've been noticing, like, are they internally working on the areas and removing the barriers and the challenges and the struggles that they are facing. But these resources that are being provided, it's supporting the day-to-day living, right? And the challenges that they're having. But when it comes to parenting and it comes to providing the care and support, the attention, the one-on-one for each child, all children, are they really holding on to the tools and the strategies and techniques that are being educated and taught to them, passed on to them, whether it's through parent partners or mentors, programs, classes, whatever it's through? Are they actually looking to that anymore? Are they using it? Is it being helpful versus them saying, I'm just going to do this so I can get that money because I really need that money, and then they don't have that foundation? I guess I'm trying to like jump from here to there and trying to say it all at once. But yeah, and sometimes I kind of see that financial support takes away a little bit from the bigger stuff. And so I don't know if someone wants to word it differently than from me, but I'm just trying to be, transparent and plain out simple of what I've been seeing and experiencing sometimes.
Thank you for that. That's a good reflection. And I think there's some opportunity for us to reframe resources, right? Because one of the things I shared was we want to address first their barriers, right? And so if financial is a barrier, we have to address that first, because the families can't focus on all the other things if their financial needs aren't being met. I will also say, when a family is looking for resources and maybe even feels like they're hoarding it or feeling entitled, right? Resources are scarce out here in these streets, y'all. It makes sense that families are hoarding or trying to see if they can get all they can get out, that all they can, because that's a survival skill. I recognize that that's signaling I need to survive, right? So when we think about what's the signal when we say, oh, are they being spoiled, entitled? Are they just drawing down these resources and then they're not going to change anything? That's a great question, but that's not where I want to start with the family. I want to first start with where are their financial needs and how can we support meeting them so that we can get to the meat of supporting their and their child's well-being or their family's well-being. And so that's where I'm going to start. I will say we all have different culture around money, how we consume resources, whether we get our nails done every other week or whether we buy NARS makeup, right? All of that looks different for all of us. And some of us do those things and can't pay our light bill, right? That's not for us to interpret. It's not our job to get into their books in that way. Our job is to really meet them where they're at and make sure that their basic needs are met, and then work from there on the incentives. But first, we have to remove the barriers. And I don't know if was that Marie who was asking that, because I don't think your camera might have been on. So I was trying to find which square was lit up while they were talking, and I think it's just my square. So
Yeah, it's Marie. Yeah, and I want to say I used to go back and forth with team members a lot. And like, they need it, let's just give it to them. And I was always give it to them, give it to them. It's not my money. And then I had a supervisor say, well, it kind of is, when you have to decide if it's appropriate or not for a family. And I was always so fixated on, I mean, if we have it and they need it, let's just give it to them. One less struggle for them, one less thing for them to worry about. And it gives them more time and attention to focus on their children's needs. And this is just something for them not worry about. But then throughout time, I did notice that some of the strategies and everything that we were working with families was not being implemented and children were still being removed. So I had to look at myself like, well, how can I approach this differently? So this training really it helped me in some areas. And so you saying that, I'm like, okay, that's another way for me to look at it. Maybe I was focused a little bit too much in certain areas, and I do need to go back to the original framework of it. And I tend to think a lot too. So I'm like, feedback and information, and this training came at a great timing for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Marie. I will also say this because we're not going too deep into like child and family teaming approach, but when we're helping a family with a need, and Donna, tell me if I'm going too far down the child and family teaming wraparound hole, because funding is definitely a point of good stewardship, is a point of contention at every agency, right? We want to help address the barriers, but we're not doing that without fully understanding what those barriers are. So I'm as a leader, I'm not writing a check to support a family unless we've done a budget and we have a long-term sustainability plan. So that should be partnered. Good support and helping families with their needs should also be partnered with a budget and conversation around how this short-term support will be managed for long-term sustainability. That is when I say, hey, it's not our business about whether they're getting their nails done or not. It just says that when they give me their budget, I'm not going to be like, well, we can't help you because you're already spending $75 a month on nails. Maybe if you took that off, that's not for me that's not the weeds I'm going into when I'm thinking about budget. I'm thinking about, right, like so I want to be clear, there's still accountability, right? That we're not blindly giving out money without accountability. That should not be happening. Okay, I see Imelda and then Taisha.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to like a time that we had a little gift card incentive for participation in like a survey panel, and um the mom seemed kind of underwhelmed when I gave it to her, and I was like, oh, okay, well maybe that's not her cup and that's not her jam. But then when I said, so what do you think you're gonna do with that gift card? She's like, I like honestly have no idea because I don't spend money on myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went into giving her permission, like on self-care. Well, what's something, well, I'm always getting things for the kids, and budgeting was an issue, and we were doing a lot of financial literacy. And she broke down into tears and she said, why is this so hard for me? And I said, why do you think it's hard? Right? I want her to self-reflect. And she said, well, I'm first generation. And so my parents sacrificed a lot and struggled a lot to give us just what we had just to survive. So I don't feel permission to go beyond survival. And it was just that revelation coming from her own heart, her own mind. And then she looked at the gift card and she like smiled and she goes, no, you know what? I'm going to get myself that thing that I've been wanting for like months. And she's like, because I'm a good mom and I'm doing a good job. And I said, yes, you are. And yes, you can. And she just needed that permission. That was a massive breakthrough for her. Massive, right? To even identify that herself as her first gen cycle breaker and to go beyond survival. And this is someone who is system dependent. And this is someone who has a lot of I can'ts and negative self thinking and doubts and low self worth. But the moment that she was able to self reflect and receive that as a gift, now I know that really the incentive she's looking for is affirmations and permission. And really what she wanted more than anything was to be told, yes, you can. And yes, you are. You're worthy of spending this 25 little bucks on Amazon. Whatever, girl, you want matching little hand towels, get the matching little hand towels. You want, you want those heatless curlers, get them. And so that was an eye opener for me, because sometimes we think that people are super entitled, but sometimes they're bound. They're already bound by the scarcity mindset. They're already bound by the poverty mindset, and they need to be met with like love and compassion and permission. And I was just so proud of her for that moment. Like that was just our little thank you for her giving me a little extra time to give us some feedback. But really what she needed more than that gift card was that affirmation and permission.
Thank you for that, Imelda. Such a good um such a good example of, right, that oftentimes the caregivers have not had the opportunity to learn how to like truly care for themselves, because self-care is so skewed in our society, y'all. Like everyone thinks it's got to be spa, manicure, right? Like it's not always material things, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but we've got to really sometimes provide some of that support around it. Taisha.
Oh, thank you, Ebony. But Imelda said it. I mean, she just spoke some of the things that I literally was going to say. And if I can add any little bit more, it's is that like with incentives, I think also what happens is it starts to reinforce for young people, it starts to reinforce like I know for me and experiences, um, you start to incentivize and it's almost like this expectation. But with family members, I noticed that sometimes the difference with incentives, it becomes like Imelda said, where it's what leads to self-care. It leads to permission, when you when you get down to digging into like and what is underneath this. Like, okay, not being able to manage your funds, okay, but what lies beneath that? Why is it that? Why are these hardships what they are? And how do we role model these
Yeah.
incentives? Because everywhere you go to, like my program, we don't always have the funding, like you said, to be able to incentivize. And so we role model when we can. We role model, we provide it out, and then it's like, how can I help you to get to a place where when you move through some other program or you seek some other service and they can't incentivize, how do you keep it going? How do you continue your self-care? How do you keep the budgeting if that's what you need help with? That is the underlying. So Imelda, thank you, and Ebony, thank you as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thanks, Taisha. It'd be really maybe even helpful as we're thinking about the tangible and intrinsic motivators is to have the caregiver make a list of what are the tangible ones and what are the intrinsic ones. Right? Like I'm going to make sure you get a gift card for going to support group next week. I'm so glad you're taking this first step. I know gift card may be a great motivator. One, I'm curious, like, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to take care of yourself? And also, what are some of the things like what are some of the things you'll gain outside of gift card, right? Like, and they might name connection, right? This is the naming entertainment. So they say, oh, I'm gaining connection. I'm breaking isolation, right? I'm right. Like, so now they're able to actually articulate, like, yes, I'm getting this gift card and I'm going to be able to take care of myself, but I'm also going to gain these three things from attending. And that hopefully will lead to the motivation ongoing, even if the gift card's no longer available, because we might be able to give the gift cards up until we close our services, but the support group's still open ongoing, right? At Stanford, we used to have groups that you didn't have to continue to be a part of services. You could continue to go even after services ended. So what's the intrinsic motivator? Connection, support, breaking isolation, psychoeducation, right? I walk away with new strategies. That's the internal motivators then. Diana.
Yeah, you kind of said it. Like, I think that sometimes the incentive just gets them there, and then the hope is that they will, like to the groups or whatever, and then the hope is that they will find the value in the group, not just the incentive. But nobody's going to get rich on the incentives. I've had people now, and I've also gotten people to like go on the group, like because I was like, I think it could really help somebody on the group, today. And it just because of their experience. And I don't say who or anything like that, but I said, if you go in the group, there's somebody there you might be able to help. And then they come on and that's a totally different kind of incentive. And it just shows, like you said, they're feeling the competence of the work that they're doing, just it was so awesome. Then I've had them say, I don't even need to get paid to go to the group anymore. You know what I mean? Things like that. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. But I mean,
Right.
nobody's going to get rich on the incentives. So I think as long as they're qualified for it, just keep getting it to them. You know what I mean? Keep getting them there.
Right. That's right. That's right. I love you're like, they're not getting rich off of these $25 gift cards, y'all. $25 is like $1 nowadays. Like, it's like they're not getting rich here. But I also love like Joanna sharing. There's a couple of folks saying, like, we don't even have like we don't have money for incentives and we have good outcomes. That's what Renee put in the chat, right? So there's lots of different ways you can incentivize without putting a financial number to it, right? Both can exist. It's great if you've got both, but if you've just got one, right, and it's not funding, utilize the resources that you have around what motivates them internally for support.
Mhm.
I love this. All right, I am going to go back to these slides because I'm just recognizing we got about 15 minutes left and we're already getting our evaluation launched. So thank you all for doing the evaluation and letting us know your thoughts on how we're doing, because that's important to us and helps us to shape future webinars. So thank you for taking some time to do that. That was our reflection break. So thank you for taking that time to reflect. As we move forward, some things to consider around building trust. I know that was one of the areas we talked about, is building trust. It's those small actions over time. I think we talked about this earlier, right? It's not in the words we say, it's in the actions that we take when we're meeting with caregivers. And so reliability, respect, transparency, and advocacy, right? That reliability, you already have shared some really great examples of how you're following through, right? Even that, like, hey, I'm going to show up, I'm going to fold laundry alongside you, and we're going to talk and we're going to listen together. That show up consistently, respecting without jargon, right? Like avoiding things, honoring their time, knowledge, and autonomy. The more we use language that goes over folks' heads, the more we're disengaging them, right? We cannot speak in acronyms. We cannot speak in alphabet soup. I always am like, somebody's like, oh, and then the FP, and I'm like, are we talking about the foster parent or the family partner? Like, please just say the words that you mean, because that drives disconnection. We also want to be transparent, be clear. I think I saw that in the list of ways that you bridge gaps with parents was clear communication. Someone put that. Shout out to who put that, right? We want to be able to describe the why behind our strategies. Like, hey, are you open to that? We ask that small yes, and then we lean into, can I tell you the strategy I was thinking and why I was thinking it might work? Right? So you're sharing the why behind your recommendation so they understand your thinking and they're co-creating alongside you. And then last but not least, which I think with so many advocates in this space, we go to bat for them when the systems create barriers, and the systems are going to create barriers, right? Something as simple as having a conversation with them about, do you know if you know they receive SNAP, do you know if your SNAP benefits are going to be impacted? Like, is there anything I could do to advocate for you? Or, when's the next IEP? And what are ways you could show up? Demonstrate that you're on their team. As an equity advocate, it is super important to talk about cultural humility, and culturally responsive practice is one of our principles in child and family teaming and wraparound. It requires us to recognize our professional training. It needs to extend to understanding cultural values. It means that we're approaching each family as a teacher who helps us to understand their own cultural context, their own values, and their priorities, and that we have a willingness to adapt our approaches rather than expecting families to conform to our models. And so this means we're being curious about their communication, their language, their childbearing beliefs, their help-seeking patterns, which, like, right, in my culture, in my family, help-seeking patterns, we don't have them. I had to be taught how to ask for help because it was, you just do it yourself. When you want something done, you get it done yourself. It's been a philosophy that's been embedded in many family cultures. And so all of those things really need to be understood by us as professionals working with our families so that we can meet them where they're at, and understand how their families work. So there's some questions to the right here that may be good questions to ask. How have challenges like this typically been handled in your family or your community? Is there something that feels right or wrong about this approach? Yeah, and see, Elizabeth said, definitely a solve it yourself culture in my family. Yeah, so I'm not alone. Who else in your family or community should be involved? This brings in natural supports, but opens the question around involvement. And is there anything I'm missing or not understanding about your situation? I think that speaks to what Tisha was asking earlier. And what else do I need to know? You're opening those questions. Danae. Oh, you had your hand up, but
My Italian was showing up and it raised my hand for me.
okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My apologies.
No worries, no worries. All right. And then we also want to acknowledge there's power imbalances. As much as we strive to flatten the hierarchy in child family systems, they exist by way of our role and title being mandated reporters. Hello, like there's a power imbalance. And so when we are navigating power dynamics, we need to acknowledge that there is a power differential. So that means we have to acknowledge it. You can write like that there is an influence there, that whether we'd like to think so or not, whether the family even names it, there is an unconscious influence. If I say the wrong thing, could I be reported? If I do the wrong thing, will this show up in court report? Will this be used against me later? Because the truth is, it can be, whether we like or whether we're going to act on it or not. And so being explicit and recognizing that power differential can really support the family in feeling like, oh, you get it, you see it. Think as much as we want to advocate, there are sometimes constraints, documentation requirements, mandated reporting. So being transparent about all of those things, like, hey, every interaction we have, I document, right? I am a mandated reporter. And if I do have to do it, here's how I'm going to act upon it, right? That transparency builds trust and helps to reduce suspicion. And then lastly, creating a pathway for shared decision making. So again, going back to autonomy being important. Thinking small things like letting them set their meeting locations, times, agendas, and positioning them as equals in the planning process. All right, I'm going to skip past our chat question, but these are just because I'm mindful of our last few minutes and want to open up the floor for any questions. But it is important to think about compliance to collaboration and shifting our mindset, because oftentimes when we're when we're in these systems, it is oftentimes feels like a compliant model versus a collaboration model. And so that compliance model, you see the characteristics are lifted to the left, right? The provider is seen as the expert with the answers. Caregivers are recipients of interventions, right? The success only happens after we've given those recommendations, right? It's oftentimes deficit-based assessments versus the collaboration model, which is strength-based engagement. The caregiver is an active partner, and their shared expertise is one that is honored and offers us an opportunity as professionals to learn from them. It really helps us to fundamentally change how we measure success. It's not about whether the caregivers do exactly what we recommend. It's about whether we've built a partnership and they feel empowered to support their child's growth in ways that work for their unique family. So for sustaining it over time, we are building those foundations early so that there is a heavy investment on the front end, the actions on the front end, the advocacy on the front end. And that first meeting with caregivers, I'm often asking, like, what are some of the things you feel particularly challenged about just within this next week? Like, what are your worries over this next week? Because if there are some small wins I can get from the very beginning with that caregiver and let them know I'm in it to win it and I'm showing up for you and we're in this together, we're a partnership, we're a team, that builds that trust from the very beginning. So I'm invested heavily throughout, but that relationship building and some of the actions that I can take from the beginning, I want to build on that as soon as possible. I'm also having regular check-ins if what we're trying on is still working for them and if they have feedback, right? I'm not waiting for those signals of resistance. I'm proactively asking good questions around what's working and what's not working so that I can adjust before I get hit with the barrier. I'm also recognizing I alone as a family partner, peer partner, social worker, clinician, whatever your role is, supervisor, I alone am not the answer to all of that caregiver's challenges and experiences. Connection to peer support widens that net for that caregiver, and I'm going to connect them to any of those resources as often as possible. And then we celebrate the milestones, small, big, as they come, especially when things get difficult, really recognizing some of the caregivers' progress. All right. Your slides, you have them. I think actually the slides you have actually has more language in them because I wanted folks to be able to come back and reflect on the slides and not miss some of what I was sharing, but also see it reflected so you can go back and scroll through them. So I hope the slides are very useful and helpful tool for you moving forward. I think Donna put in the chat earlier in the webinar, I'm likely going to come back maybe at the beginning of the year for follow-up conversations and discussions. So I really look forward to that. Here are some practical tools and next steps I'm hoping folks take along with them. And so just some good reminders from our conversations today. To do that barrier assessment, look at what are the signals. So there, instead of it being pathologized as resistance, we look at it as signals. So that's the barrier assessment. What are the signals our caregivers are telling us? How are we looking at their strengths and orienting them to our strength-based approach so they're not like, take those strengths and shove it down your throat, right? Like, I don't want to hear it. I want to talk about the problems. We really make sure they're well oriented to the strength-based approach. We ask about the incentives, both external and intrinsic. We think about our power that we hold and what those power dynamics and how that might impact our community members, our caregivers. And then we also think about our language. How do we talk about caregivers? Nothing pisses me off more than sitting in my office or in my cubicle and hearing folks be like, oh, I think they're dual diagnosis and they have this and that. And you're not even a clinician pathologizing this parent and making, right? Like, no, we remove that. We don't do that. We think about how we can reframe that language into strength-based language, that they're overwhelmed, they're navigating barriers instead of being non-compliant. All right. And so this is our last little closing reflection. And it's just that, the greatest gift that we can offer caregivers is not our expertise. It's our belief in their capacity to navigate challenges and our commitment to walk alongside them. So thank you for walking alongside me today and walking alongside all of us for all that you shared in the chat and come off mute and shared with the group. It's been amazing being in this learning space with everyone. And I hope you've gotten your evaluations done and look forward to maybe seeing you join a session with me in January.